Hey everyone, welcome back to Bix Book Summary. I'm Bix, and today we're diving into a book that challenges everything we think we know. Adam Grant's Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. We often assume that intelligence is about having all the right answers, but what if real wisdom is knowing when you're wrong? What if the key to growth isn't just learning, but unlearning? Grant argues that in a fast-changing world, the ability to rethink and adapt is far more valuable than simply memorizing facts. Whether it's in our careers, relationships, or personal growth, our willingness to change our minds can shape the course of our lives. In today's video, we'll break down 11 powerful lessons from this book, teaching you how to think like a scientist, embrace doubt, and develop intellectual humility to grow and succeed. If you're ready to challenge your assumptions, sharpen your thinking, and become a lifelong learner, then let's jump right in. Imagine you're locked in a debate with someone who refuses to change their mind, no matter how much logic, data, or reasoning you present. It's like talking to a wall, frustrating, exhausting, and completely unproductive. But now, take a step back and consider, have you ever been that person? Adam Grant explains that most of us unknowingly fall into patterns of thinking that make it difficult to rethink our opinions and beliefs. Instead of being open to new perspectives, we often settle into three rigid mindsets that prevent us from evolving. There's the preacher mode, where we defend our beliefs with unwavering conviction, treating them as sacred truths that should never be questioned. Then there's the prosecutor mode, where we become fixated on proving others wrong, rather than taking a step back to evaluate whether we might be wrong ourselves. And finally, there's the politician mode, where we adjust our stance only when it benefits us socially, seeking approval rather than truth. The problem with all three is that they don't allow us to grow. Instead of critically evaluating our own ideas, we reinforce them, even when they no longer make sense. Grant introduces a radically different approach to thinking, one that mirrors the mindset of a scientist. A scientist doesn't cling to their beliefs as unchangeable facts, but instead treats them as hypotheses to be tested, refined, and updated based on new evidence. Instead of being attached to being right, they focus on getting it right. They ask themselves the difficult but necessary questions. What if I'm wrong? What evidence would change my mind? What would I do differently if I discovered my belief was flawed? Imagine applying that same approach to your own thoughts and opinions. Rather than arguing to win, you start exploring to learn. Instead of shutting down opposing views, you examine them with curiosity. The next time you find yourself in an argument, pause for a moment and ask yourself whether you're thinking like a scientist or simply clinging to an old belief out of habit. Rethinking doesn't mean abandoning everything you stand for. It means being flexible enough to adjust when new information presents itself. Growth isn't about being certain, it's about being open. Let go of stubborn thinking, question your assumptions, and embrace the possibility that you might have something new to learn. Most of us hate the feeling of being wrong. It's uncomfortable, sometimes even embarrassing, like a small crack in our confidence that we try to patch up as quickly as possible. But what if being wrong wasn't something to fear or avoid? What if it was actually a superpower? Adam Grant argues that the ability to recognize mistakes and change our minds isn't a flaw, it's a skill. Intellectual humility is what separates great thinkers from those who stubbornly cling to outdated beliefs. History is full of examples of people who embraced their mistakes and used them as stepping stones to something greater. The Wright brothers, for instance, didn't get their airplane off the ground on their first try, or their second, or even their 100th. Time and time again, their designs failed. But instead of getting defensive or doubling down on their miscalculations, they saw every failure as valuable data, every crash as a lesson in what not to do. They treated each setback as a clue, refining their approach until they finally unlocked the secret of flight. Contrast that with some of the biggest disasters in history. Financial crashes, business collapses, even wars. So many of them fueled by leaders who refused to admit they were wrong. When people become too invested in being right, they stop questioning their assumptions. Instead of adjusting their course, they charge forward, even when all signs point to failure. The cost of stubbornness isn't just personal. It can ripple out to affect entire economies, industries, and generations. But here's the thing. Realizing you're wrong doesn't mean you failed. It means you've learned something new, and that's a reason to celebrate. The next time you catch yourself holding onto an idea just because it feels uncomfortable to let it go, try shifting your perspective. Instead of saying, "I was wrong," say, "I've learned something." That small change in mindset turns failure into fuel for progress. Being wrong isn't a weakness. It's proof that you're evolving. Growth isn't about clinging to what you know. It's about being willing to question, adapt, and rethink. Have you ever noticed that the loudest, most confident person in the room is often the least informed? They speak with absolute certainty, dominating conversations, yet their insights rarely hold up under scrutiny. This isn't just an annoying personality trait, it's a psychological phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with low knowledge tend to overestimate their expertise, while true experts, aware of the complexity of a subject, are often more hesitant to make sweeping claims. We see this everywhere. The colleague who talks the most in meetings is often the one with the least valuable input. The person shouting their opinions on social media, convinced they have all the answers, usually lacks real understanding. Meanwhile, those who have actually studied a subject in depth tend to express uncertainty, not because they don't know enough, but because they understand just how much they don't know. Overconfidence is dangerous because it shuts the door to learning. When we believe we already have all the answers, we stop asking questions. We stop seeking new perspectives. We become trapped in our own ignorance, unable to grow or adapt. The key to breaking free from this cycle is intellectual curiosity, the ability to remain open, to question our own assumptions, and to actively seek out knowledge. The smartest people aren't the ones who need to be right all the time. They're the ones who are constantly looking to learn. Instead of clinging to certainty, they ask themselves, "What don't I know yet? Who has a perspective that could challenge mine? What new evidence could reshape my understanding?" They don't see doubt as a weakness. They see it as a doorway to deeper insights. The more you learn, the more you realize how vast and intricate the world really is. True intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the humility to keep searching for them. Stay curious, stay humble, and never stop rethinking what you think you know. Most of us grew up believing that intelligence is about having all the right answers. The more facts you know, the smarter you are. But in reality, the most intelligent people aren't the ones who cling to what they already know. They're the ones who constantly question it. True wisdom isn't about certainty. It's about curiosity, the willingness to challenge our own beliefs, and the ability to adapt when new information emerges. Take the story of Mike Lazaridis, the brilliant mind behind BlackBerry. He revolutionized mobile communication, creating one of the most popular devices of its time. But when touchscreen smartphones started gaining traction, he dismissed them as a passing fad. He was convinced that physical keyboards would always be superior, refusing to rethink his approach. While Apple and Android embraced the future, BlackBerry clung to the past. By the time Lazaridis finally reconsidered, it was too late. The market had moved on, and BlackBerry, once a dominant force, became irrelevant. This is the danger of refusing to rethink. What once made you successful can become the very thing that holds you back. The world doesn't stand still, and those who are unwilling to adapt risk being left behind. Contrast that with the mindset of a scientist. A scientist never treats any theory as absolute. They design experiments, test assumptions, and refine their understanding based on evidence. They don't cling to a single answer. They adjust their thinking as new discoveries emerge. If you want to stay ahead in life, in business, and in learning, you need to think like a scientist. Challenge your own beliefs instead of blindly defending them. Seek out opposing viewpoints, not to argue, but to understand. Be willing to update your opinions when new evidence proves them wrong. Knowledge isn't fixed, it's fluid. The moment you start treating your beliefs as unchangeable facts is the moment you stop growing. The world is constantly evolving, And success belongs to those who are flexible enough to evolve with it. Stop seeing knowledge as something static. Treat your beliefs as scientific theories, always open to revision, always subject to improvement. Have you ever found yourself in a debate where, no matter how much logic or evidence you present, the other person refuses to budge? It's as if the more facts you provide, the more stubborn they become. And if you're being completely honest, you've probably been on the other side of that situation too. Digging in your heels, even when the evidence suggests you might be wrong. Adam Grant explains that the real issue isn't lack of information, it's psychological resistance. When people feel like their beliefs are being attacked, their natural instinct isn't to reconsider, it's to defend themselves even more fiercely. This is why arguing rarely changes minds. The harder you push, the harder they push back. Not because they're necessarily right, but because being wrong feels like a threat to their identity. So if arguing doesn't work, what does? Grant introduces a technique called motivational interviewing, a powerful approach that encourages people to rethink their own beliefs, not because someone else tells them to, but because they arrive at the realization themselves. Instead of forcefully presenting facts, this method relies on asking open-ended questions that spark self-reflection. Imagine you're trying to convince a friend to start taking better care of their health. A direct approach like, "You should really start exercising," might trigger defensiveness. But if instead you ask, "What do you think would be the biggest benefit of exercising?" Or "What do you think is stopping you from doing it?" you shift the dynamic. Rather than feeling pressured, your friend now has to pause and reflect. These questions don't impose a viewpoint. They create space for them to explore their own reasoning. When people come to new conclusions on their own, they're far more likely to embrace change than when it's forced upon them. The key to persuasion isn't to argue louder or overwhelm someone with facts. It's to guide them toward their own moment of realization. If you truly want to change someone's mind, stop trying to win the debate. Instead, ask thoughtful questions that help them reconsider their own stance. In most workplaces, confidence is valued far more than curiosity. We tend to admire leaders who are decisive, unwavering, and sure of themselves, believing that strong leadership means sticking to your convictions no matter what. But Adam Grant argues that the most successful organizations aren't built on certainty. They're built on doubt, debate, and the willingness to rethink. The best workplaces don't just allow open-mindedness, they expect it. A prime example of this is Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund led by billionaire investor Ray Dalio. Unlike traditional corporate environments where questioning the boss can be risky, Bridgewater has created a culture where challenging leadership isn't just accepted, it's rewarded. Employees are encouraged to question decisions, express disagreements, and challenge assumptions, regardless of rank. They operate on radical transparency, where constructive criticism is not only welcomed, but considered essential to progress. In this kind of culture, rethinking isn't seen as a weakness, it's a sign of strength. On the other hand, companies that resist rethinking often find themselves becoming irrelevant. Nokia, once a dominant force in mobile phones, failed to adapt to the rise of smartphones. While Apple and Samsung embraced the changing landscape, Nokia clung to its old ways, believing its existing success was proof that it didn't need to change. By the time the company finally reconsidered its strategy, it was already too late. The lesson here is clear. Success isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about surrounding yourself with people who challenge your thinking. The best leaders aren't the ones who always have the answers. They're the ones who know how to ask the right questions. Whether you're a leader or an employee, take a moment to reflect. Do you encourage feedback or do you shut it down? Are you open to rethinking your approach or do you resist change? Workplaces that thrive are the ones that create a culture of open dialogue, constructive criticism, and continuous learning. The organizations that succeed long-term aren't the ones that cling to the past. They're the ones that embrace the future by constantly evolving. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to surround yourself with people who think just like you? It's comforting when our opinions are validated, when our beliefs are echoed back to us without resistance. But as reassuring as that might feel, it also creates an echo chamber, one that limits our ability to see beyond our own perspective. Adam Grant argues that true intellectual growth doesn't come from being surrounded by agreement. It comes from engaging with those who challenge our views and force us to rethink. One of the greatest examples of this comes from Abraham Lincoln. Unlike many leaders who surround themselves with loyalists, Lincoln deliberately filled his cabinet with people who disagreed with him. He understood that progress wasn't about protecting his ego. It was about making the best possible decisions. He welcomed constructive opposition, knowing that being challenged would refine his thinking and ultimately lead to better leadership. By contrast, history is full of leaders who crumbled because they refused to listen to dissenting opinions. From dictators to corporate CEOs, we've seen countless examples of powerful figures who built empires on certainty, only to watch them collapse because they ignored alternative perspectives. This principle doesn't just apply to leadership, it applies to every aspect of life. If you want to expand your thinking, actively seek out views that are different from your own. If you lean conservative, read a well-argued liberal perspective. If you're an atheist, have a thoughtful conversation with someone who is deeply religious. If you're in tech, step into the world of the arts. Exposing yourself to different viewpoints isn't about changing your mind on everything. It's about understanding why others think the way they do. It forces you to question your assumptions, sharpen your reasoning, and develop a more nuanced understanding of the world. If you truly want to be wise, don't just surround yourself with people who reinforce what you already believe. Seek out those who challenge you. Growth isn't found in comfort, it's found in the willingness to rethink. Letting go of long-held beliefs is one of the hardest things we can do. There's a certain comfort in sticking to what we've always known, in trusting the systems and ideas that have worked for us in the past. But unlearning is just as important as learning. Adam Grant argues that clinging to outdated ways of thinking isn't just limiting, it can sometimes be downright dangerous. One of the most striking examples of this comes from elite firefighters who had to be retrained on new safety protocols. These new methods were designed to save lives, yet some of the firefighters resisted them, unwilling to let go of the techniques they had relied on for years. The tragedy? In high-risk situations, their refusal to adapt cost them their lives. Their past experience, instead of being an asset, became a liability. What once worked for them was now putting them in harm's way. This lesson extends far beyond firefighting. In any career, in relationships, in personal growth, refusing to rethink can hold us back, or worse, set us up for failure. A lawyer who insists on using outdated methods, ignoring advancements in legal technology, risks becoming obsolete. A teacher who refuses to adapt to new learning styles and educational tools may struggle to connect with students. A business that ignores shifting consumer demands will eventually find itself losing relevance, no matter how successful it once was. So take a moment to reflect. What is something you've believed for years that might no longer be true? Is there an area of your life where you need to let go of outdated thinking? Progress isn't just about acquiring new knowledge. It's about shedding old habits, reevaluating old beliefs, and making room for better ways of thinking. Growth doesn't come from stubbornly holding on to the past. It comes from having the courage to unlearn. Uncertainty makes most of us uneasy. We crave control, solid answers, and the comfort of knowing what comes next. But Adam Grant argues that embracing uncertainty isn't a weakness. It's one of the most powerful skills we can develop. The ability to navigate the unknown, to stay flexible in the face of change, is what separates those who thrive from those who fall behind. Look at Jeff Bezos. When he launched Amazon, the future of online shopping was anything but certain. Most people doubted it would take off, assuming customers would always prefer physical stores. But instead of demanding certainty, Bezos leaned into experimentation. He didn't need absolute proof that online shopping would dominate. He simply tested, adapted, and refined his strategy as the market evolved. That willingness to operate in uncertainty turned Amazon into a trillion-dollar company. Now compare that to companies that refuse to rethink their assumptions. Blockbuster believed people would always prefer renting DVDs at a physical store rather than streaming from home. Kodak ignored digital photography, certain that film would never die. Both companies were so convinced they were right that they failed to adapt, and that refusal to embrace uncertainty cost them everything. The truth is, certainty is an illusion. The world is constantly evolving, and the people who succeed aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who are willing to question, pivot, and grow. Instead of chasing absolute certainty, start asking different questions. What if I'm wrong? What are the possible outcomes? How can I prepare for change rather than resist it? Confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing you can adapt to anything. The sooner you let go of the need for certainty, the more prepared you'll be for whatever comes next. Rethinking isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice. Adam Grant suggests that if you want to stay adaptable and open-minded, you need to make questioning your beliefs a regular habit. One way to do this is by keeping a Rethink journal, a space where you consistently challenge yourself to reevaluate what you think you know. Take time to ask yourself, what's something I've changed my mind about recently? What beliefs do I need to question? Who can I talk to that sees the world differently from me? The best thinkers don't just passively accept new information, they actively seek it out. Great scientists, entrepreneurs, and artists never settle for good enough. They are constantly questioning, experimenting, and refining their ideas. Einstein reworked his theories over and over, Bezos continuously evolved Amazon's business model, and Picasso reinvented his artistic style multiple times throughout his career. Their success wasn't built on certainty, it was built on curiosity and the willingness to rethink. If you want to stay sharp and adaptable, commit to rethinking at least one belief every month. Ask yourself, what have I learned recently that contradicts something I used to believe? Am I truly open to being wrong, or do I just think I am? How often do I deliberately seek out opposing viewpoints instead of reinforcing my own? The goal isn't to change your mind for the sake of it, but to ensure that your views are based on the best possible reasoning, not just old habits or assumptions. The smartest people aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who never stop asking better questions. The moment you think you've figured everything out is the moment you stop growing. Keep questioning, keep evolving, and never let certainty become a barrier to learning. Imagine a world where people didn't cling to their beliefs out of pride or fear, where debates weren't about proving who's right, but about discovering the best ideas. A world where curiosity replaced stubborn ignorance, and learning was valued more than being correct. Adam Grant argues that rethinking isn't just a personal habit, it's something we should actively encourage in those around us. But how do we get others to rethink without making them defensive? The most effective way is to lead by example. If you want people to see changing their mind as a strength, not a weakness, show them. Be open about the times you've been wrong. Admit when new information has made you reconsider something you once believed. When you model intellectual humility, you create an environment where others feel safe doing the same. Another powerful tool is curiosity. Instead of shutting down opposing views or jumping straight into counter-arguments, try asking, what led you to that conclusion? This simple question shifts the conversation from confrontation to exploration. It signals that you're not here to attack their beliefs, but to understand them. And when people feel understood, they become far more open to reevaluating their stance. Rethinking doesn't have to feel like an exhausting debate. It can actually be fun. Treat it like a game. Instead of arguing about who's right, challenge each other to come up with the best argument against your own opinion. This forces both sides to step outside their mental comfort zones and consider new perspectives. When we create a culture where questioning our assumptions is normal, we help people break free from rigid thinking and develop the mindset of lifelong learners. The key to helping others rethink isn't about forcing them to change. It's about sparking their curiosity and showing them the joy of discovering something new. True progress happens not through arguments, but through inspiration. If there's one message that stands out from Think Again, it's this. True intelligence isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing when to rethink. The smartest people aren't those who cling to their beliefs with absolute certainty, but those who have the courage to question, adapt, and evolve. When you challenge your own beliefs, you don't weaken your knowledge, you strengthen it. When you embrace doubt, you open the door to learning. When you rethink old ideas, you don't lose your identity, you expand it. In a world that's constantly changing, rigid thinking is a liability. The people who thrive aren't the ones who claim to have all the answers, but the ones who stay curious enough to keep asking better questions. So here's a challenge for you. Take a moment and reflect. What's one belief you've held onto for too long? Is there something in your life, your work, your relationships, your personal growth that you need to rethink? And most importantly, are you willing to admit when you're wrong? If you found this summary valuable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Bix Book Summary. If you want to support the channel and dive deeper into Adam Grant's insights, check out the link in the description to get your copy of Think Again. And before you go, drop a comment below. What's one thing you've recently rethought? Let's start a conversation. Until next time, stay curious, challenge your thinking, and never stop learning.